Okay, at this time, everyone should get a note that acknowledges that we are recording this session. You can accept our invitation to record during your participation today. Mr. Cooper, you'll want to refresh the link and try again. At the present time, you should have access to that link so that you can post your questions there. So we're going to get started right away. Thank you for joining us today. I am Natasha Pratt Harris, an instructor, associate professor in the Department of Sociology, Anthropology, and Criminology and Criminal Justice at Morgan State University. And what we're doing today is having the opportunity, thankful to the technology, to share what will happen as it relates to the time to communities' experiences and perceptions of the Baltimore City Police Department survey. One of the things I want to make clear is that this process is not simple. We do follow a strict research protocol, and this survey that we're going to be conducting is approved by the Morgan State University Institutional Review Board. This is time 2. In the fall of 2018, we began the time 1 community survey as part of the requirement for the Baltimore City consent decree. And at time 1, we were able to identify community interviewers to conduct interviews of persons in Baltimore to assess their perceptions and experiences with the Baltimore City Police Department. What I'm about to do is share my screen. I'm going to stop my video so that the sharing will not be in any way impacted by the video streaming. And I will begin using this share. I know, like me, our time is limited. So we're going to make certain that we are complete this process by or before 11 o'clock a.m. At Morgan State University, we have what's called convocation that begins promptly at 11 o'clock a.m. One of the notes I want to make clear is that in the chat, I posted the link for you to enter questions that you may have along the way. The expectation is that we are not interrupted in this process, and the questions can be organized and I can respond to those in a timely manner. Possibly at the very end, if it's more lengthy, it may happen after the close of this particular Zoom. So first, I'm going to acknowledge that this is the Community's Experiences and Perceptions of the Baltimore City Police Department survey, time 2, IRB approved, and that information is available on your screen. This is conducted by the Morgan State University Institute for Urban Research and the Department of Sociology, Anthropology, and Criminology and Criminal Justice, of which I'm a faculty. One of the things I want all of us to be mindful of, and again, on this call, we have persons from the Baltimore City Police Department, the Department of Justice, the monitoring team, and Morgan State University, the research team for this particular initiative, community interviewers for the time 2 survey. And there's a learning curve that varies depending upon where you sit as a part of this particular conversation. So I want to make clear that I'm kind of sharing some things to bring everyone up to speed, at the same pace, even though some of us know more than others. First off, the Baltimore City Police Department consent decree has the requirement, there's a requirement that there is a monitoring team. And we acknowledge the Baltimore City Police Department monitoring team. If you would like to field or confirm more information about the monitoring team, you can visit bptmonitor.com, and on the About page, you'll be able to acknowledge who the representatives are for the monitoring team, one of which you'll see later in a photo. On my screen is Ken Thompson, who was able to visit us. He's the lead monitor for Baltimore City, who was able to visit the campus of Morgan State University during the training that we offer at time 2 for the community survey. So I'm going to also acknowledge Seth Rosenthal, who is a core member of this team at Morgan State, whereby he and I have worked closely on this initiative, and he's a representative for the monitoring team. His roles vary, but he is well versed on this particular survey, and his title is Deputy Monitor. So if you want to take a look at more information about the monitoring team, you can use the link below, bpdmonitor.com. Morgan State University's Institute for Urban Research is led by Dr. Raymond Wimbush. He actually acknowledged that the BPD monitoring team had a request for proposal to conduct the community's experiences and perceptions of the Baltimore City Police Department survey. And he identified me, Natasha Pratt Harris, to lead this effort. So we submitted a proposal in the summer of 2018 initially, that was accepted. And then we began collecting survey data in the fall of 2018 for the Time to survey. An additional proposal was submitted to the monitoring team for fall 18, we did the Time 1 survey. An additional proposal was submitted March of 2020. It has been modified up until August 25th, so we can go through the process of doing the Time 2 survey. And one of the things I want to make clear, and you can also take a look at this on the IUR webpage, is the mission of the Institute for Urban Research. The Institute for Urban Research was established at Morgan State University in 1978 and mandated by the state of Maryland to identify and research urban issues in the region, and when relevant, share the information with policymakers. During its 40-year history, the IUR has conducted numerous surveys on community attitudes toward, let me make sure my screen is not impacted by, community attitudes towards state and private institutions. It focuses on survey research involving populations that are traditionally overlooked, underserved, and rarely asked questions, often reserved for majority populations. It's 8-member staff. They have a full-time staff. The IUR at Morgan State University has a full-time staff, but consults and engages with faculty throughout the campus and staff throughout the campus. The staff reflects a diversity of disciplines so that robust snapshots of the study communities and institutions are produced that maintain integrity and avoid biased stereotypes of Marylanders. So I would like each of us to take the opportunity to check out the IUR webpage. If there are any ideas or questions you have about research that's been done in the past via IUR, they are available there. You'll also be able to take a look on your own at the findings of the Time 1 community survey, which is available via the Baltimore Monitoring Team's website. And via a quick Google search, you can find it also available via the Journal of Blacks in Higher Education. So keep that in mind. And as we move on to the next slide, here we are kind of sharing our story as Morgan State University, Department of Sociology, Anthropology, and Criminology and Criminal Justice faculty and students. And here we are with Kent Thompson, the lead monitor, fall 2018, when we actually conducted the Time 1 survey training in our building. Of course, due to COVID-19 and the protocols that we're following, obviously we're doing this particular training via Zoom. And the folks that are represented here are our graduate students who were community interviewers. But again, our interviewers are not limited to students alone. We've also included community members to partake in the process of conducting community surveys. Those community members varied in their backgrounds, including, but not limited to, retired members of the Baltimore City Police Department. We had a representative who is a community interviewer who is a NAACP legal defense attorney. We've had just a whole host of folks who represented different backgrounds who were able to conduct community interviews at time one. The current team of for the community survey includes myself, Natasha Pratt Harris, a coordinator who's on the call at the moment, Aaliyah Moore. She is a graduate of our Master's of Sociology program at Morgan State and current PhD student at my own alma mater, Howard University, in sociology and criminology. She was able to start off as a community interviewer. She moved on to become a coordinator. She helped to do some analysis of the time one survey findings and with the report that was submitted and made public in March of 2020. The statistician is Dr. Timothy Kinlock, a well-lauded faculty at the University of Baltimore. He was actually my professor in statistics at University of Baltimore, well known for his work with Friends Research Institute. Then we have Lucy Moran, who is a PhD candidate completing her dissertation in English at Morgan State University. She is the editor for the Time 2 survey. She also served as an editor at the tail end of the Time 1 survey and analysis and reporting. She started off as a community interviewer, and she has insight about this process. This semester, we identified Tanea White. Thankfully, she's a graduate research assistant and a student in the master's program at Morgan State University. And she serves in wearing many hats to get the Time 2 survey launched, including some work she did last week to complete and create a press release that went out to members of the media to acknowledge that this survey will launch for Time 2. She'll also be responsible for what we'll talk about later in terms of identifying the random participant. And we'll talk about what that means. The research assistant, graduate research assistant, and the coordinator will be responsible for any moments when we will identify participants using a random sampling technique. We also have two undergraduate research assistants, Domingo Delgado and Sydney Whittington. They are responsible for some of the legwork involved in this process, which included some work done over the weekend with Mr. Delgado of stuffing envelopes to get the interview invitations mailed out to the randomly selected addresses. We'll talk about what that means a little later. There will also be the process of making certain that the appropriate labels are on the envelopes to send out to those who've been randomly selected based upon an address. Again, these will be potential participants in the survey based upon their response. We also had what we call SCARF translators. SCARF is Spanish, Chinese, Arabic, Russian, and French. The community interview has been translated into each of those critical languages, acknowledging the varying language or use of language among the many participants, the possible participants. And those folks are also invited to conduct community interviews, especially when there's a language barrier. One in particular, the Spanish translator actually was the Spanish interpreter person for the Time 1 community survey. And last but not least, the reason we are here today is to shed light on this process for our community interviewers. They represent the frontline. We'll talk about what that means, folks who'll be actually engaged in an interview with members of the community using the survey to ask questions about their perceptions and experiences with the Baltimore City Police Department. As I mentioned earlier, the cap that we have for community interviewers is 2515, representing Morgan State University students, and 10 of whom will be community interviewers outside of the university. Just to give you some insight as to this process, it's a process. We began this process in March of 2020 to prepare for the time to community survey and interview, with a initial proposal presented just at the brink of the COVID-19 shutdown. So March of 2020, this included the budget, obviously the proposal, which included the budget, and the actual survey, and looking at the questions and getting ideas, suggestions about the questions that are included. We've been in this process since March of 2020 up until the present time. From May 2020 till the present time, there have been modifications, a final survey. The critical language translations actually began in the summer of 2020 with those SCARF translators. Beginning summer of 2020, we began having conversations with the parties. The parties are representatives from the Department of Justice, the Baltimore Police Department, and the monitors. Beginning summer 2020, we began discussing the 3 sample preparation. We'll talk about that in a moment. 3 samples includes a random sample of potential participants from random streets in Baltimore City, randomly selected. Random is not a, we don't mean this in a, we mean this in a scientific way, by the way. And then random addresses, and then a purposive sample. We'll discuss the details there. Training, which is happening right now, September 2021, whereby there's training. This is recorded. Anyone who's not here will have to watch this particular training with one of our team members, and ask questions during that time. Post those using the link that I shared. And also training continues when folks begin doing the interviews. That's like on the job training that will take place. Data will be collected via those community interviews beginning this month. And our goal is to be complete with the community interviews by November of 2021. The next goal is to be engaged in the analysis and reporting, whereby the analysis begins December 2021, and the reporting and presentation of the final report would be presented in March of 2022. So just to give you a sense of that process, one of the things we want to make very clear is that we are following the COVID-19 protocols. This particular process, conducting these community interviews, is different from time one. In time one, we actually met one-on-one with members of the community who were selected for participation via our sampling technique. We actually had face-to-face interviews with 648 participants. And at this present time, we are not having in-person interviews. These interviews will be distance, remote, virtual. This would include the recruitment for participants and the actual interviews. When I say interviews, basically we have a survey, and the community interviewer will use the survey, which is an online survey, to ask members of the community their, those questions on the survey, which is related to their perceptions, experiences with the Baltimore City Police Department. This is just something I'm sharing as relates to our own safety and health. It is imperative that no matter where we are, whether we're conducting the community surveys, interviews, doing any recruitment, and recruitment again is virtual. I'll explain exactly how that works. We are wearing face coverings when we're in public spaces. We are at least 6 feet from other people, and we frequently wash our hands. I just want to shed light on where we are in Baltimore City regarding vaccination. I'd say approximately just shy of 50% of Baltimore folks, I'm not sure what that actually means, by the way, but based upon this news reporting, about 50% of Baltimore folks are vaccinated. Statewide, it's above 50% who are actually vaccinated. One of the things that happens at Morgan State is that there's a requirement that our student, staff, and faculty are vaccinated. That if they cannot be vaccinated, there's a medical, waiver that they have to present. And given the stringent requirements for our Morgan folks, I'm following that for the community interviews, whereby we can't acknowledge mandated vaccination for members of the community. So we're keeping our folks safe using the COVID-19 protocols, whereby we're doing the virtual remote distance community interviews. And for further information, if you would like to find out where we are in Baltimore City in particular, you can Google Baltimore City COVID-19 rates. And I did that earlier today. I'm acknowledging that we have increased numbers, especially considering the Delta variant. So what's happening? So Mr. Delgado, thankfully, our undergraduate research assistant, was able to stuff envelopes this past weekend. And when I tell you his work is pristine, I actually mean it. We were able to send, we haven't mailed them. We haven't mailed the invitations to any member of community. We haven't dropped those in the mailbox just yet, but they have been stuffed. There's an invitation acknowledging that we're conducting community interviews beginning this month through November of 2021. And given our goal, we are asking participants to get in touch with us. We know this creates a barrier because the face-to-face recruitment probably is the best method to identify participants, even using a random sample. But what we're following is the COVID protocols, and persons are not given the opportunity to email us, to give us a call, or to complete a form to acknowledge participation, acknowledging members of an address. Persons who are at a particular address are 18 years of age or older, and they report that they live in Baltimore City. There's also a flyer which acknowledges that this particular survey time 2 is taking place. Persons will have the opportunity, everybody in Baltimore City hopefully will have a sense that this is happening. We acknowledge that everyone won't necessarily be aware of it, but this announcement basically acknowledges that it's happening. If a person is interested in more detail about the survey, they can definitely ask. This is a community survey. Community voice is important. In terms of participating, there is a process because we have a sampling technique that includes the random sampling technique and a purposive sampling technique as well. So if you call and say, hey, I want to do the survey, that's not enough. There's a process involved, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, so the sample. What we describe as our sample is a 3-sample approach. We have what's called a random street sample. That's where we actually begin in this process. We identify 27 streets of the more than 4,200 streets in Baltimore City. And our goal is to exhaust the possibilities relative to the random selection of participants based upon 2 things. Number 1, persons identified on the streets, like actually physically on the street, so that's the random street, and then persons identified based upon a random address. Again, the address selected randomly. This is a scientific process. It's one that the community interviewers should be aware of because they are CITI certified, and there's discussion about random selection of participants. And part of the process is that we begin with an invitation. Then there's some communication to confirm that a participant is eligible, 18 years of age or older, and reports they live in Baltimore City, and that we then follow a random purposive sample. What we have is a 2-part data collection process. 2 parts, meaning 1 part includes random selection of participants. The second part includes the possibility of having to do a purposive sample. So the random selection of participants, as I said, includes a random selection of streets initially, then a random selection of addresses on those streets. And that's a process that the graduate assistant and the graduate coordinator are aware of and connected to, because the job of the coordinator in particular this past week was to identify the random streets. We worked together to identify the random streets and then going through the process of randomly selecting addresses. Our community interviewers are not involved in that process. That is the job of the principal investigator and the coordinator and graduate research assistant. There's a process that members of the party and our research team, including the coordinator, myself, research assistant, and our statistician and editor are aware of, whereby we use random.org, which is a website where you can do a random selection of numbers to help follow through in a process that allows for participation based upon a random sample. Now, one of the things we want to make clear, when we do human subject research, it does not eliminate bias. When we're following through on a random, even a random sample, it doesn't eliminate bias. The goal is to reduce the potential for bias, given the protocols that we're following using a random sample. That first image that you see is for a random address. One of the things that we are doing is for each address, when we confirm the number of persons at an address that are eligible to participate in given this image, it appears that this is what it's basically saying. There are 10 folks who are eligible to participate. They reported that they are 18 years of age or older, and they report that they live in Baltimore City. We would go to random.org just to give you some insight. Again, the community interviewers do not have to do this. We go to random.org and select a number, and this is where we are because we have a cap of 600 participants, random number from 1 to 600. No, I'm sorry, we actually go to random.org to confirm out of the 10, how many can participate. So we type in a number from 1 to 10. In this particular image, 2 persons were eligible to participate out of that 10 for that particular address. Now, one of the things I want us to do, because this particular moment lends itself to a lot of questions, but if we listen closely, I think it'll come across clearly. Also, if you have a question, make sure you use that link to post your question. At the present time, I cannot see your questions in the chat. So use that link to post your questions if you have a question at this time. So in this particular image, 2 of the 10 are eligible to participate. Now, the question is, well, how do you get to determine which 2 will participate, which 2 will be invited to participate out of the 10? Well, it's not up to us to make that decision. It's not up to the participant or potential participant to make that decision. We would actually ask each participant to identify a number anywhere from 1 to 600. And the 2 persons from 1 to 600, and then we use random.org to identify a number from 1 to 600. The 2 persons who were closest to that number that was randomly selected using random.org will be invited to participate. So in this case, we actually had some numbers at the bottom of the previous slide. The persons in purple selected the numbers that were closest to the numbers out of 1 to 600. This is, if you're listening closely, this is a simple process that the graduate coordinator and the research coordinator and graduate research assistant will be helping to make a decision about as we communicate with members of the community who are in touch after they received an invitation. So that's for the address. That's the first row. The second row is a representation of persons who are identified on a randomly selected street. So because we are not only following the IRB requirements in terms of us getting IRB approved, us acknowledging the protection of human subjects, us following through on the COVID-19 protocols, we we'll identify a date randomly where we would do a canvas of a street and identify a street, meaning a randomly selected street, and identify persons on the street who are eligible to participate. And if you know anything about me, you know that means I will have like the flyer to acknowledge that we're doing the community survey. I would share it at a distance, meaning through the window of the car or something to that effect, with the mask at a distance if I have to step out of the vehicle, and acknowledging, so many feet away that we're conducting these community interviews. And if someone's confirming that someone's 18 years of age or older and reports that they are persons who live in Baltimore City who are on the particular street on that randomly selected date. So what happens in this particular visual in the second row, there are 10 persons who reported that they are in fact, we confirm that they are in fact eligible to participate. They're 10. Okay, and this is a hypothetical scenario. There are 10 persons. And what we decided at this point, is, okay, we have to use that random.org site, type in a number from 1 to 10, type in 1 to 10. And in this particular visual, you'll see that we were able to identify out of the 10, 9 persons who could be interviewed, meaning there are 10 people. It doesn't mean we would invite the 10 to participate. We would still do random.org to confirm who would be able to participate. And here it's 9. And then we would then determine, based upon what we did for the random address, we would determine, well, who would be the 9 of the 10? Who would be the 9 of the 10? The 9 of the 10 is based upon them selecting a number anywhere from 1 to 600. The 9 that identified a number from 1 to 600, the closest to that number that we did via random.org, will be invited to participate and scheduled for an interview. It is not a part of the protocol to do the interviews at that moment. Why? Because we want to set up the parameter that is COVID-19 friendly, where we will do the virtual remote distance interview using the technologies that we have in place, including Zoom. We talked about this with the research team, WhatsApp, cell phone, and if persons don't have the technology, we will provide technology so that remote distance virtual interview can take place. What will happen for the community interviewers? The community interviewers are looking at this right now. They may be interested in learning more about the process, but the community interviewers themselves do not have to partake in this part of the process. What will happen is that they will provide a schedule of availability, and then we would plug in information so that they can contact a participant or confirm a time to do an interview with a participant. It'll be scheduled, and they're just doing an interview. What you're getting now, this is for the community interviewers, what you're getting now is some background that confirms how the participants were identified. So that's very important. The community interviewers are not involved in the process of randomly selecting streets. They're not involved in the process of doing a random selection of addresses. They're not involved in the process of randomly selecting participants. They are involved in doing the community interviews. Another part of this process is the part 2. So those first 2 rows represent part 1 of the survey and interviews. The part 2 is what we call the purposive sample. So when we take a look at our data after the part 1 interviews have taken place using that random selection process, when we take a look at the data really quickly, I'll see that there may be something posted in the chat. I just want to make note that I cannot see it at this present time. If you have a question, make sure you use the link to post the question. At the tail end of our presentation, we'll have question and answer. So when we look at the data at after part 1 of the community interviews, and we're trying to assess if we have followed through on not only the consent decree community survey requirement, but also the Institute for Urban Research mission And we're acknowledging that the members of the LGBTQ, persons representing the varying groups, ethnicities, countries that we know of in terms of persons who are in Baltimore City. The squeegee, and we don't like this language, by the way, but we're acknowledging in Baltimore, many reference young folks who squeegee to make a living as squeegee kids. They're actually often adults. Squeegee kids, members of the homeless population. If after we conduct the part 1 sampling, and we're acknowledging that folks are underrepresented in those categories. For example, if we don't have a representation that matches population regarding the Latino population, we would do what's called a purposive sample to make sure we have representation from the Latino community. And that will involve what we've done before, identifying organizations, neighborhoods, and the like that are reflective of a population that was underrepresented during the part 1 random selection. Same thing holds true for all the other groups. On the survey, which I'll share shortly, there are questions that will help us to confirm if we have representation from these groups. When we look at the data after part 1, if they are underrepresented, we would make sure that we do our part with the purposes sample to include those folks. Now, the possibility exists. Getting this right at part 1 would mean that we have a fair representation of folks in Baltimore City, given the consent decree community survey mandate and the mission of the Institute for Urban Research. And it's possible that the part 2 purposes sample is not necessary, or that we may have to identify one group of folks who are underrepresented as opposed to all the groups that you see via the visual. So just keep that in mind as it relates to the sampling. So what I'm about to do now is move us to some acknowledgement of the work of the folks who have joined us today, and the folks who are not available at this moment, what they are responsible or were responsible for. The human subject research protocols are in place based upon what I do as a professor at Morgan State University, as I teach and I've taught research methods at the undergrad and graduate levels. I've also sat on dissertation committees and thesis committees. And I'm a researcher who's done work in Baltimore for over just about 25 years. And one of the things that we are acknowledging is that we have a responsibility to conduct human subject research that is credible, that represents the voice of the people. And our goal is to reduce bias in our processing. What I share with students and what I've learned in my career is that bias is not eliminated, no matter the protocols that we follow. The rationale behind why bias is not eliminated is because human subjects are conducting human subject research. So there's always going to be bias. There's even bias in the time frame that we've allotted to do the surveys. For example, it is possible that a person who would have been eligible to participate in August of 2021 will not be identified in September of 2021 because we have a biased approach to acknowledging the time frame that we are conducting the survey. But our job is to do our best to offer a protocol that is based upon these very consistent methods, acknowledging that there's always limitations and that there always is bias. So I just want to make sure that's clear. Our community interviewers have been responsible. In fact, the graduate research assistant and the 2 undergraduate research assistants were selected because they were CITI certified as students in my graduate research techniques class and in my undergraduate research methods course. They've also completed a course where they had to get IRB approval on their own research. They've done some human subject research themselves, and they're now applying what they've learned, with this particular process. So everyone on our research team is CITR certified, including Aaliyah, who's a graduate of our master's program, who's done the same. Each of the persons who applied to be community interviewers, before getting the invitation to participate today, they had to complete CITI certification. The CITI program is a free program whereby persons were responsible for getting certification on social and behavioral research, where they're acknowledging some of the policies and procedures for protections of human subjects that are part of the Institutional Review Board at Morgan State University. Really quickly, the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, is that arm of research at all institutions, it should be, whereby human subjects are acknowledged as potential research subjects, and there are protections in place for those research subjects, including their voluntary consent, acknowledgement that what they're sharing is confidential, that they will there'll be a maintenance of anonymity in the process. Over the course of time of prepping for this particular Time to survey, there's a lot of discussion about our process. And one of the things I've made clear, and I'll continue to make clear, is that there are some things that we cannot do and that we cannot share because of the nature of human subject research, confidentiality, anonymity. For example, as we recruit participants, we are asking them not to share their name or any identifiable information like a birthday, to maintain confidence and anonymity of participants. So what we've done is we've acknowledged that they will get a code in the mail, and we'll follow through in the code to assess or to invite or to confirm their the address participants' eligibility. When they complete a form to confirm an interview, we will call them and say, the form was completed on September 1, 2021 at 9:07 a.m. And we're just following through on a person who may be interested in completing or eligible to complete a community interview. We will not gain any identifiable information for any of the participants in order to protect with confidence and anonymity. That's just part of the protocols that we're following, especially given that we are interviewing folks using the virtual remote distanced format. In person is a little different. We had the experience of just saying, "Hi, Dave, thank you for participating." We don't want that discussion to happen in a way that we can't be confident about who's on the other end of the phone or who's listening and all those types of things. So we're following those strict guidelines in terms of no identifiable information. There is an informed consent that persons will be consenting to as we go through the actual survey, where there is a statement on informed consent. So that is also part of our process. The survey, this is the meat and potatoes of this Zoom call. As I've mentioned, the survey team includes SCARF translators. The SCARF translators were able to translate the survey via the online survey again, translate them into the Spanish, Chinese, Arabic, Russian, and French. What you're seeing on the screen is the Arabic header for the Time to survey. And again, those folks who were the folks who translated are invited to participate as community interviewers, especially when we have folks who represent any of those languages. We don't have, as you notice, an exhaustive possibility at the moment as it relates to languages, but we have identified the translators, and we made translations via those critical languages, Spanish, Chinese, Arabic, Russian, and French. I acknowledged already that there is an informed consent, which will be read at the beginning of each interview. read to each participant. Part of our process and rationale for doing the community interview is to eliminate the potential for problems because of literacy issues. Also, where the community interviewers are being trained to conduct community interviews, there will be consistency regarding the presentation of questions. Consistency is required as it relates to how we engage with members of the public, not using inflections on certain things, not involving our perspectives or our thoughts in the process of doing the community interview. Some of that is addressed via CI/TI certification. There is, however, the potential for bias, and there will be limitations because there are human subjects doing the human subject interviews. There's a time commitment involved in this process. At time 1, the interviews could take up to 90 minutes. At time 2, the interviews can take up to 30 minutes. What we are able to do is provide a $25 incentive to compensate community interviewees for their participation. And, quite frankly, because of the time commitment, I'm thankful that we were able to do that via the funding that came from the monitors to compensate the participants for their time. The community interviewers already have information about their compensation for actually being community interviewers. For each interview, there's a certain amount that they are allotted for conducting the community interview. So what I'm about to do is unshare my screen and go forth to share the actual survey so that we can talk about the questions. And keep in mind that the survey is one that folks will have access to when in fact they are, complete this particular training. They are scheduled for a community interview. And initially there will be some guidance, like someone sitting in possibly on the actual interview to make certain that the ongoing training is taking place. And at the moment I am pulling what's available on my screen so that I can share the survey. And what you'll notice is I'm going to talk us through the process whereby the community interviewers actually completed a practice survey so that they can get a sense of what the survey is like. So they basically answer the questions for themselves in order to participate in this process as community interviewers. So let me get back to my screen so I can then share with you the screen where you'll be able to look at the actual questions. And what it's called is a pilot survey, by the way. They did a pilot. They didn't use the link at all for the community interviews. So it's this pilot survey that they were able to take a look at. And there you have it. So as I mentioned, the survey is translated into Spanish, Chinese, Arabic, Russian, and French. This is the English version of it. The more likely version that will be used. In that, on that first screen, we have an introduction to the actual survey and discussion about the interview, contact information for myself. On the next screen, again, what will happen is the community interviewer is having a conversation with the persons who were identified to participate, and they are going to be reading from the screen, acknowledging what's detailed on the screen for the community interview, and then moving forth to input the responses of each participant. That is to be made clear. The only people who will have access to this link will be the community interviewer. And obviously the members of the research team, and so much is their task to possibly conduct community interviews themselves, or possibly be a part of the analysis of the data, which is available because we can download this from the Google form, which dumps into an Excel spreadsheet, and we convert that to a SPSS file to do analysis. But again, the community interviewer will read each screen item to walk the participants through the process. I'm going to do it quickly for this first screen. Acknowledging the introduction. Morgan State University's Institute for Urban Research is responsible for collecting the Baltimore City Police Department's monitoring team's community survey called The Community's Experiences and Perceptions of the Baltimore City Police Department. Dr. Natasha C. Pratt-Harris, Associate Professor and Criminal Justice Program Coordinator at the Department of Sociology, Anthropology, and Criminology and Criminal Justice at Morgan State University, serves as the principal investigator. Please direct all questions to Natasha Pratt-Harris or call 443-885-3506. Thank you for your participation. Then on the next screen is where we have the consent statement. So what happens for those of us who come from the old school of conducting human subject research, we have participants, oftentimes we give them a consent form, they read it or we read it, and at the end they sign and we sign. Given the technology that we have, given the COVID-19 protocols that are in place, what we do here is we read the consent statement, acknowledging all the details and requirements, and then we select, we say, we're gonna, if you are agreement, select yes. My verbal agreement on the statement indicates that I have been read the information provided and have decided to participate. So this is a requirement that we read through on the consent statement. We select yes. And then the research interviewer at this point will type in their name. So this is important that the research interviewer, this is the community interviewer, that they type in their name, whereby they are getting credit for conducting the community interview. And this data comes to me via an Excel spreadsheet confirming that the community interview did take place with, in this case, Natasha Pratt-Harris. I'm going to just say that this particular participant is an address sample participant. The community interviewer will know that much, whereby when this is scheduled, it'll be acknowledged that the interview is scheduled for X date based upon the participants' availability and the interviewer's acknowledgement of their schedule. And there'll be a note that this is in fact a an address sample. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so yes, I'll type in, my name is community interviewer, select address sample, and then move on to next. Here we are in the first part of the actual community interview and survey. Question is, where were you born? We would ask the person, where were you born? This is data that we're collecting for time 2, like we did for time 1. Please respond to each item here. Again, just to clarify, when we recruit participants based upon the street sample and address sample and the purpose of sample when necessary, we will ask them, and they have to confirm that they are at least 18 years of age or older, and they will report that they live in Baltimore City. That is their task at the point of recruitment. We identify those folks, we move through the process as we've already shared. And part of the questions on the survey is to ask about if they were born in Baltimore, if they've worked in Baltimore, lived, were raised, attended school, or visited the city of Baltimore, and if there are any other details regarding their Baltimore City affiliation. One of the things that we have in place is questions based upon their affiliation with the city as of July 1, up is most recent is July 1 to the present time of collecting the data, or up until the time of data collection, whereby we literally concluded data collection for Taiwan on June 30th, 2019. So we're just acknowledging detail for the participant at this point, based upon who they are as it relates to Baltimore, at least as of July 1. We're already in the process of collecting data. We're just getting more information from the participant at this point regarding their affiliation with the city. We asked a question about how safe have you felt in the city? Overall, for example, this is the way I would ask the question. Overall, how safe have you felt in Baltimore City? And we'll tell them, they can respond very safe, somewhat unsafe, not safe, or no opinion. Okay, and then we ask more detailed questions. Now keep in mind, this survey has quantitative and qualitative types of questions, meaning they're closed-ended questions that are quantitative, and they're qualitative items. So they can give us their words in certain sections of the survey. So for example, places where you've lived, worked, attended school, trained, or visited at least twice a week in Baltimore City, which is the most safe in your opinion. They can share what's most safe. What does that mean? They can say East Side, West Side. They can say Highlandtown. They can say Morgan State University's campus. They can say whatever what comes to their mind. You would also ask, what time of day do you feel the most safe? And then name the location and describe why you feel most safe here. They give us some detail about their safety in certain parts of the city. They'll ask the same question about safety as it relates to the least safe in their experience and in their opinion. We're asking a question about how would you describe the crime rate in Baltimore City? Low crime, moderate crime, high crime, or no description. We ask about actions they've taken to increase their safety in Baltimore City. So these questions range from walking or traveling, carrying a weapon, minding their own business, or not having any particular processes to increase their safety. So again, their range here, they also could indicate other as it relates to the means by which they use to increase their safety. Then there are questions here. We're asking them at this point, we'll say, please answer yes or no for each of the following. I have personally observed the Baltimore City Police present and patrolling the community or neighborhood regularly. They would say yes or no. You would, as the community interviewer, plug in yes or no. So what I'm doing at this point is giving me the opportunity to move through the slides, because you'll notice as a community interviewer, if you don't indicate something for each of the possibilities, you won't be able to move forward. So I'm actually just typing in some things to kind of move us through. And again, we've already covered the ones I'm going through at the moment. Just to help us again move through the survey. That represents me outside of Maryland, but in the United States. Okay, so we're moving through here. I'll just say, I mind my own business is a common phrase used among folks. I mind my business. That is a possibility related to increasing safety. Another question, set range of questions here. Please respond strongly agree to strongly disagree. I have thought that the Baltimore City Police Department does a good job of serving the neighborhood or community. I have thought that the Baltimore City Police Department treats people respectfully. I have thought that the Baltimore City Police quickly solves crimes and arrests criminals. So as the community interviewer, you would indicate their response. And then this next range of questions, please indicate on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not likely and 10 being the most likely, if you would do or have done any of the following in Baltimore City. So one thing is possible, a person can respond with a 10. What you have to do is scroll to the right, as I just did. They also can respond not applicable to any of these items. Again, you have to scroll to the left or right for each of those items, depending upon their response. Okay, so they would select 1 to 10, and there's going to be a not applicable option for all of them. So for example, the previous question was strongly agree to strongly disagree. Neither agree nor disagree is an option, which is like, they don't have a response. So they're like neutral, right? Same holds true in this next section. Not applicable, it's a possibility. So what I'm doing here to move us through the items is I'm actually selecting not applicable. One of the things you'll notice, depending upon what device we are using to input responses, is that if you flip the device horizontally, you'll be able to see the range more clearly. But because, for example, I'm using something that's vertical, I have to slide back and forth. But just keep in mind, it's 1 to 10 and not applicable. One of the questions here, I will call the Baltimore City Police to report a crime if someone broke into my car or vandalized my car. One of the things you want to do is acknowledge that some of the questions may sound similar, but it's not the same question. So you'll still ask the question, no matter what their previous response was, or no matter their response, like that sounds like the same question, you still ask the question. The next section is also a 1 to 10 possibility, from 1 not likely to 10 most likely. And again, the same holds true in terms of sliding your cursor to the right to indicate responses that are not visible initially. Please respond strongly agree, agree, disagree, neither agree nor disagree, disagree or strongly disagree to each of the following. I think Baltimore City police officers effectively reduce crime is one of the questions. Another one, I think Baltimore City officials have a good working relationship with the community where matters of public safety in Baltimore City are concerned. So again, you would indicate their responses and make sure that you're following through on the possibility of response. One thing I want to make clear for the community interviewers and for all the other folks on the call is the process to get a survey done. It didn't just happen overnight. The parties have taken a look at this survey. The coordinator has seen this survey, time 1 version, the time 2 version that we're looking at the present. So we've kind of gone through this already. If there are questions about the survey for those members, the parties, and our coordinator, our statistician, our editor, the members of the team who had access, you can reference the survey link that I've shared before, which is the time 2 survey link that's available in your email. I'll share it again if necessary, but also use the link that I posted in the chat if you have questions about the survey specifically, for example. Please respond strongly agree, agree, neither agree nor disagree. Again, in this section, one of the questions is, I think the Baltimore City Police treats people of all races and ethnicities fairly. And you'll read each of the questions on the left, or read each of the statements on the left and indicate their response as you're moving through. Please respond yes or no to each of the following. I've gotten nervous when I see a Baltimore City police officer or Baltimore City police car. And you're going to indicate their response, yes or no, in this particular section. And then you ask questions that speak to some more of their experiences. And you would select based upon what is applicable. So here you would select all that apply. I do not get nervous when I see a Baltimore City police officer or Baltimore City police car. If the answer is they do not, you would select it. I feel nervous when I see a Baltimore City police officer or Baltimore City police car. I do not get anxious when I see a Baltimore City police officer or Baltimore City police car. I feel anxious. So no matter what they respond or however they respond, you would select based upon your reading that particular statement. Again, you would select all that apply. On the next screen, this is about the policing perceptions and opinions. And we want to know, not that they are excluded or included at this point, but we want to know about recent experiences. That's why the question's about July 1, 2019. Have you had a personal experience with a member of BPD at any time since July 1 of 2019? And you will indicate their response, yes or no. Yes says experience reported at least one, experience is reported at least one personal experience with a member of the BPD up until the time of the interview, July 1, 2019 to the time of the interview. No, and what's happening here, you don't have to read the word experience or perception. We're acknowledging that some of our participants are experienced folks. Keep that in mind, experienced folks, they've had an actual experience since July 1. Some of the folks are perception folks, meaning that they're gonna share with you their thoughts, but they didn't necessarily have an experience. So you would ask, have you had a personal experience with a member of BPD at any time since July 1, 2019? Yes or no? And for our sake, our data collection sake, we're acknowledging that these are experienced folks, yes, or perceptions folks, no. Overall, how satisfied have you been with policing in Baltimore City? You would indicate their responses here, very satisfied to very dissatisfied. You would also ask each of these items to share or read each of these items. And this would be, my thoughts on policing are based on, and you select all that apply. And you would ask them, my encounters with police, the encounter my friends or family have had with police, conversations that I've had with others, the news, videos, and audio on social media, my relationship with the community, my relationship with police officers in my family, among friends, or in my community, my past experience in the law enforcement profession, my current work in the law enforcement profession. I have no opinion or other, of which they would indicate their thoughts on policing there. Now, what I want to make clear for the community interviewers, it is very likely that your respondents, the participants, would not have had an experience with a member of law enforcement in Baltimore City. That's why this is called the Community's Experiences and Perceptions of the Baltimore City Police Department Survey, Perceptions and Experiences Survey. So just keep in mind, you know, the majority of folks don't even have contact per se with law enforcement, but just about everybody may have a perception of law enforcement. On average, I encounter Baltimore City police officers, and this is where we get to the point of persons saying how often they encounter them. So it can be daily to I have never encountered Baltimore City police officers. So again, the possibility exists that I would just hypothesize that persons will say yearly at the most, like that'll be the average, the modal average in terms of persons reporting encounters with law enforcement. And I'll say several times a week because of teaching students who are law enforcement professionals themselves. Have you felt comfortable communicating with Baltimore City police officers? And you ask them yes, no, or I'm not sure. And they can respond that way. Okay, here we are. So this came up at some point with the parties regarding the neighborhoods. Keep in mind that these three visuals, are only viewable to the community interviewer, unless of course they share their screen, because you can share a screen in Zoom and the community, the respondent can actually see the visual. That is a possibility. You can't share the link, but you could possibly share the screen, and we'll talk about that. I have to like mull over that as I'm thinking about the Zoom interview possibility. However, we're the community interviewer as accessing the survey and indicating the responses of participants. There are 3 maps that will help if there is a question about neighborhoods or parts of the city. This may be helpful for the community interviewer who may or may not have, committed to memory in any way what Baltimore City looks like on a map. So there's a neighborhood map. There's also a zip code map that talks about the zip codes as it relates to the parts of town in the city. And then there is a map that talks about, acknowledges the districts, the police districts, right? So, if it comes a time when a community interviewer is like, I'm not sure. The respondent is, I'm not sure where this took place. So what part of town have you observed or encountered a Baltimore City police officer? And then you scroll down to the next section and you would indicate places where you have observed or encountered a Baltimore City police officer. You would say, is it East Baltimore, West Baltimore, North, South, Central, Northeast, North, Southeast, Northwest, or Southwest, or other? Again, other could be what they decide other is. I would say, for example, growing up in Baltimore, I would say Northwood, which is the Northwood community near Morgan State University, for example. It may not fit perfectly into Northeast because I'm not familiar with that being Northeast, let's just say, right? So you would just indicate what they shared if they said other. The next screen acknowledges the possibility of encounter or observation. The following questions pertain to times when you observed or encountered a police officer in Baltimore City. And this could be where you observed an officer and had no encounter, possibly asked a police officer for help or information, were stopped by a police officer during a traffic stop or other times, or were questioned by a police officer. And when we talk about questioning being by a police officer, that can range from an officer asking questions and going the distance in terms of making an arrest. So that can range. An encounter obviously can mean anything, asking for help through being taken into custody. So have you observed or encountered a Baltimore City police officer? If the participant has not observed or encountered a Baltimore City police officer, please skip to the next section. So you would actually skip this entire section if they have not observed or encountered a Baltimore City police officer, and then you would say next and just skip this entire section. Okay, and the instructions are clear. You would skip this section if they have not observed or encountered a Baltimore City police officer. So let's say they have, so we would say yes. They are given the opportunity to describe, how would you describe the officers you observed or encountered in Baltimore City? And you would ask them to select or to share all that apply. As the community interviewer, you would select all that apply. They took the time to meet members of the community or neighborhood. They did not take time to meet the members of the community or neighborhood. It is possible that a person would have an encounter at one point where the officer or officers took time to meet members of the community or neighborhood, or made an observation as such, or they did not take time during another encounter to meet members of the community or neighborhood. So you would indicate all that they have shared. And these possibilities range from meeting members of the community or neighborhood through questions about the possibility in terms of age range of an officer. Again, just some demographic details about perceptions and experiences, encounters, or not. Please describe the location where you observed or encountered an officer. So earlier they shared location, east, west, north, south, southeast, southwest, so on and so forth. Now they can give more detail about neighborhood, street possibility, and or they can just indicate it was East Baltimore. Whatever it is that they share is based upon their recollection and their reporting at that time. And here they can offer additional thoughts regarding their experiences or perceptions here. And this is, again, it can run the gamut in terms of their possible perception, their possible experiences. Now, I've been talking on this particular survey for, I would say, at least 25 minutes. I'm just gonna say, because I didn't time myself. I'm talking through this, acknowledging that we have community interviewers on the call, and they are learning this process. The time to conduct a survey will not take as long as the time that I'm using to share the survey, right? It's up to 30 minutes, not many, it will be 30 minutes, okay? Earlier when I was reading some of the questions, I know I was talking rather fast because time is of the essence in terms of the space that we're in to conduct this training. But again, when you're interviewing participants, the reading of the statements, the time you're taking to read, if possible, explain a statement or reread a statement that you're asking them to respond to, it won't take this long. And over time, given the cap that community interviewers have on conducting these interviews, it'll almost become second nature in terms of you're remembering some of the questions that are on the survey and be able to read them and have a flow. So just keep that in mind. It doesn't take as long as I'm presenting it here. This last section we reserved for the demographic section. Again, this is where we're able to acknowledge some variation in terms of who our possible participants are, indicating that we have done our part to identify the hard to reach, adhering to the consent decree mandate for the community interviews, and the IUR, Institute for Urban Research mission. So you would ask them, how would you describe your gender? They would describe their gender. How would you describe your race or ethnicity? You indicate their responses. You would ask them to share their age as of their last birthday. How do you identify, select all that apply in these boxes, single, and you ask them, single. You won't just say, if they say single, then that means they're not married. You say single, yes or no, married. You select what they say, separated, divorced. It could be a person who is married, but at some point was divorced. You can actually select both, right? So just don't limit yourself or limit them in terms of the possibility of response. They could be in a committed relationship, but not married, but they also could have been divorced, right? Or they could be separated in a committed relationship, but not married. And we're asking at this point if they represent LGBTQIA. Here, this is not a marital status question. We're saying, do you identify as any of these items? So keep that in mind. That's why they're in the same section. Next, we're asking, is English your first language? And this point indicating we would know if they speak another language fluently or they don't speak English at all, right? Because we would have already had them participate based upon one of the SCARF translated languages surveys. So we would indicate here that the majority of the participants will acknowledge that English is their first language. Survey is not limited to English being the first language for any participant. How would you describe your living situation as of the date of completing this survey? And again, here is where we would be able to confirm representation from members of the from the participants that we identified via that random sampling technique. It's possible that we've identified a representative number of persons who may identify as homeless, right? And given that possibility, we wouldn't have to make the call to identify members of the homeless community for the purpose of sample, right? So we had a number that represented the homeless population, we would have to do that for the part 2 of the survey. So just keep that in mind. We are actively, we meaning myself, the coordinator, I'll be asking Dr. Kinlock as well, the statistician, to just have us take a look at the data at this point to see if we have a sample that looks like Baltimore after we, or as we are collecting the time, part 1 of the survey, part 1 time period for the survey, and then the conclusion of the part 1 time period, and then saying, do we have to move into a purpose of sampling protocol? Do we have to do that? We'll ask ourselves those questions as we get to approach November, because again, we're looking at data collection through November, possibly being done with random selection and not necessarily needed, but we won't know that, not necessarily needing the purposive protocol. Then we'll ask them questions about how they earn their income. One of the questions here is, I squeegee to earn money. We want to see if we have a representation of participants at this point who represent this group who are often not interviewed, given human subject research in the city of Baltimore. That's another underrepresented group. We'll check our numbers to see, well, do we have representation of folks who are in this category after or as we're completing part 1 of data collection? we would in fact make an assessment, and at the very end, we'll confirm, well, do we have to move on to the purposes sample to include folks, for example, who squeegee to earn money. We will also ask them to describe their career or line of work. This can include paid or unpaid work. We'll ask them about their activities during the week. I work. I am addressing my health needs, attending drug rehab, alcohol rehab. One of the things that we acknowledge when we ask questions about a person's affiliation with Baltimore City, it may be possible that persons are in certain parts of the city or in the city in general, often because of the nature of how they spend the most of their time. If they're here for drug rehab or because they attend because this is a place of worship for them, those are the types of things we want to know to, again, speak to who Baltimore folks are, who are in the city and who we've identified via our sampling techniques. How many total people are you responsible for? How many children under the age of 18? What's your educational level? Wraps up the actual survey. You'll notice that I'm not submitting the form whereby that would actually be added to our data, which we're not collecting at this moment, but we're definitely using the survey or sharing the survey so we all have a sense of what the survey looks like, the interviews look like. So quickly, we have 24 minutes. I think we're on a roll. We've done well. We have 24 minutes. I'd like you to possibly, if you have a burning question, if you want to ask that, you can post it in the chat and also ask it out loud as well. If you've had questions throughout, I'm hoping you posted those using that link because again, the goal is to organize those questions. For the community interviewers who had questions prior to joining us, they were asked to post their questions via the form that they were able to complete. I'm hoping I answered your questions because I kept those in mind as I was presenting. Anyone have any questions? I'd like Aaliyah quickly, if you don't mind, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, especially after I've been talking for so long, just to say hello and acknowledge your role. And if nothing else, I'm just publicly thanking Aaliyah for the work she did this past week, where we cleaned up the addresses that we identified. We haven't selected the addresses randomly yet, but we have identified the addresses for each of the randomly selected streets. We have to make sure that the list is clean in so much as the zip code and the code that comes after the zip code and like units and apartments and all those types of things that are required before we say, here are the addresses. If they're like 35, this is to give folks some heads up, if there are 35 addresses on a street, we would plug in 1 to 35 in our random.org link. How many of those addresses will be randomly selected? Random.org may say 12. So then we would use a randomization process via Excel to say, these are the 12 of the 35 that are included in this particular sample. Those are the addresses that would get the invitation to participate. Introduce yourself, Aaliyah.
So first I do want to say that
I think.
Can you hear me now?
It might be me. You know what? It might be me. Excuse me. That's me. Don't mind me. I'm using a Mac and I'm new to this Mac situation, so I had to raise the volume. My apologies. Go ahead, Aaliyah.
Can you hear me? Can anyone else hear me?
I think everyone can hear you. It was just me.
Okay. So first, the link, it still needs permission, and I think it's because some of us aren't part of Morgan, so I don't think we could do the link. But so my name is Aaliyah. I joined the research team in 2018 as a student at Morgan State in the sociology program. I assisted with the general detail fine-tuning of the survey when I came in as a student. And then I went on to be a community surveyor. So as someone not from Baltimore City, it was great to go out and interview and speak and converse with people about their perceptions and their experiences with Baltimore City PD. After data collection, I moved on to be a graduate coordinator. So I was in charge of finalizing the community interviews and then gathering the details for the report for time one. I've since graduated from Morgan, so now I'm a coordinator and I'm a current PhD student, sociology PhD student at Howard University. So as she said, my role will be assisting with training and then also helping, well, developing the methodology, particularly the address selection process. So if anyone has any questions about the community surveying protocols or anything like that, I am here to answer any questions. You're on mute.
I'm muted now. I'm muted. Okay. So let's see who else we have in the room. Let's see. Okay. All right, and I don't know if Seth wants to just say hello. Oh, before Seth, Tanea is here. Tanea, if you don't mind, Tanea is a super person on our project. She is a graduate student at Morgan in sociology and anthropology, and again, CITI certified, and she's a graduate research assistant. If you don't mind introducing yourself. And Tanea, my apologies, the meeting we had on Tuesday, we talked about just a brief introduction. So if you are in earshot, do you mind sharing or introducing yourself?
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Tanea White. I'm currently a grad student here at Morgan State. My major is sociology. I also got my bachelor's here in sociology as well. And I look forward to going into teaching and becoming a professor of sociology. Right now, I am a flex trainer, a HECA flex trainer. So I assist with all of the troubleshooting with our hybrid flex classrooms. So if anybody here needs assistance, just shoot me a call or email and I'm here to assist.
And then for the community interview itself, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not sure if you were on, she was able to help with the press release that's gone out via our PR office, just to announce that this survey is actually taking place. Just to be clear, announcing the survey is taking place didn't say, hey, folks, you're all invited to participate in this survey. There's a protocol in place. It's just letting the public know that the Time 2 survey is in a launch mode pattern. So that's that. I shared on the screen the team. We have Dr. Kinlock, who is the statistician select for this project. If he wants to say hello, just so folks who will know who you are. And then Lucy is a previous community interviewer. She can say hello as well. And she's serving as the editor. And he is my research professor from University of Baltimore, where I earned my master's in criminal justice.
Well, I must say that I have known Natasha for over 45, yes, 45, and I'm not saying anything bad about her. I've been at UB since 1995, and she was my student in I think 1997.
You're right.
And I served on her master's thesis, which happened. I think it's here in this room. It's 1998.
Wow, yes, you're right on track. All those dates are right on track.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kinlock. And Lucy.
So hello, everybody. I've participated a whole lot in the Time 1 in different roles. Fundamentally, I am a wordsmith. And as Natasha, as you were going through that presentation, it was fantastic. I mean, in terms of your word choices, that's how I evaluate people in the end. But I had two observations that I wanted to make. based on my experience with interviewing participants the first time, but also related to your key point you reiterated several times, which is we cannot eliminate bias. That includes bias even in word choices like on a survey. So one of the things about old time Baltimoreans, there is no 8 parts of Baltimore. There's East Side and West Side, that's it.
Mhm.
And if you talk to anyone, even like younger people, although it's much more their parents' generation that just had that line and you just knew what East Side was and West Side was, and maybe a little bit sometimes the South Side. But North, if it was like North, it was, no, that's the county if it's too far up there. Otherwise, it's East Side and West Side. And it's historical, and probably old time cops have that same sense. So just even like that word choice. And then the other word choice that I ended up with the most difficulty in understanding participants when they were trying to explain something is that this group here, I'm sure, has this clear sense of, I have a perception but never encountered police. I observed police but never encountered police. I encountered police but never experienced police, and I experienced. Believe me, I would say 20% of Baltimore people do not have that distinction. And so I remember one man that was describing his, it's one of those questions, right? And he's going on and on and on about this, and he was really traumatized by it. And it turned out his brother was the one that experienced what he experienced. So I just say that to say Baltimore is also very, very much a relational community in terms of the experience of police, that people will own experience or encounter, or even if you say encounter versus observation, they'll say, what does that mean? Because their emotional thing as they're on the corner watching somebody get arrested is they are encountering police, not that they're observing police from a distance. So I just sort of say that to say that that's one of the values and reasons for qualitative data. Because if you were just asking the question, have you observed, perceived, have opinions about, encountered, experienced, and you had them just have check boxes, you would not get the reality. And it's when you get those little stories. But yeah, that was, for some people, I never did get a clear answer, because from their mind, again, if my brother experienced it, I experienced it.
Thank you so much.
So those two types of things in terms of word. There's only East Side and West Side. That's bottom line.
Well, I can tell you stories about East Side and West Side, but thank you so much. And I will make this note. This is why we're thankful that you are an editor, because again, wordsmithing is the thing. We need that when someone edits a document, which is quite cumbersome. Thank you so much. And last but not least, I'm acknowledging that we have some community interviewers on the call. If you have questions, I see one person posted one in that link, and my apologies, that link is now accessible for non-Morgan affiliates. If you have a question or had a question, you save the question, whatever, please use that link to post the question. If you have a question now, please ask, but I'll say that one of our community interviewers is here, and they actually posted a question of which I'll address one-on-one and make sure that they're good. And Seth and Megan have been working the most closely with myself and the team over the course of this past few months. Seth, again, since fall 18, he's been a part of the team, leading many parts of what we do. So if you have any comments or questions or statements, we'd appreciate that. If not, again, we're gonna wrap up this Zoom, and we have 12 minutes to go. And we do have convocation at Morgan State.
No comments. Oh, go ahead, Seth. I see you just took yourself off mute.
Oh, sure. So I know most of the folks on this call already. Welcome to those that I have not met yet, the community interviewers. I just want to reiterate something that Dr. Pratt-Harris said at the beginning of the call, which is that at this point, we are all part of the same team. And we who have been working on police reform in Baltimore since the beginning of the consent decree in 2017 are really grateful for your participation. on our team and are very much looking forward to reviewing the work product that your collective efforts produce. The community survey is an important part of our evaluation of the police department's progress towards meeting the requirements of the consent decree. There's a lot going on under the consent decree, and the police department is, making reforms, day by day as we go along, and we are providing technical assistance to them, and we are evaluating the work that they're doing towards reform. But at the end of the day, whether or not they're meeting the requirements of the consent decree depends on whether the community actually believes they are meeting the requirements of the consent decree. And one of the ways that we gauge whether the community believes that the police department is meeting the requirements of the consent decree is through this very instrument, through the community survey. And that's why the work that you all will be doing out in the field, interviewing Baltimoreans, is absolutely critical to this enterprise. So once again, welcome to the team, and we look forward to working with you over the next few months.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure Megan had a question or comment.
Nope, no questions. Just jumping on what Seth was saying. Just good morning and thank you all so much for being here. And I look forward to reviewing the findings from the survey.
Thank you so kindly. And just as a quick little note here, I'm going to post something for everybody just to make sure we are on the same page regarding any questions you'll have beyond this Zoom. Let me just do that quickly. Here we are. It's really interesting how we have all these links and things, and I'm gonna make sure you guys have the right one. Okay, so if you have additional questions, I'm posting the link again. I actually was able to clean up the option there, so it could be non-Morgan affiliates. So if you click that link, that last link, that's the one we would use to ask questions if you have additional questions beyond this point. And we're just keeping everything organized. I am thanking you for your time. Thank you for your input, your suggestions, comments, critiques. All those things are necessary when we do human subject research, which is as useful, because all the work we do, no matter what it is important, but as useful as this is. So all have a good day. Please stay safe. As I tell my students, for everybody to stay safe, wash your hands, distance, all the good stuff. We want everyone healthy as well. Everyone take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.